This
forward
conference will now be recorded.
to hearing on air pollution in Syracuse and some related issues to the I-81 project. Before I introduce our lead panelist today, and then before I turn it over to Diane Brandley, our Greening USA president, for a couple of announcements, I just want to say I see a couple of people from the mayor's office, and we appreciate you being with us today. I saw Sharon Owens, and I saw Greg Lowe come in. I'm not sure if my icons are getting really small now, so I'm not sure who is there. So if I missed you, I know the mayor said that he was interested in joining in too. So I hope he's able to make it.
Yeah, he's logging in right now, so he should be any minute. You'll see his name pop up as a participant momentarily.
Oh, fantastic.
Yep.
And I see my old friend Eileen Gilligan in the audience today. So welcome, Eileen. And some of you, this might be your first green bag lunch. Hopefully, it's not. I do see a lot of regular green bag lunch participants, which Greening USA tries to organize on a monthly basis. And let's see. I just want to say hi to Ben Walsh, if he's has he been able to get.
Must still be going through the login process, folks.
Okay, in the meantime, let me turn it back to Diane for a minute, tell you a little bit about Greening USA and maybe a couple of announcements she may have. Diane?
Yes, thank you for joining us. This is a pretty good sized crowd for a green bag lunch, and we very much appreciate you showing up. A couple of things: if you find value in what we do, please sign up for our electronic newsletter. It's free. It lists sustainability events all over upstate New York. It also has some news of interest to the sustainability crowd. And I see that Jeff Anthony is on with us. Jeff is our membership chair, and Jeff wants to do a shameless self-promotion for Greening USA.
Yes, I do. I believe everyone can hear me. I'll keep it brief. Yes, as Diane mentioned, my name is Jeffrey Anthony. I'm the membership director. Welcome on this beautiful, windy spring day. I just wanted to reiterate that Greening USA is made up of all volunteers. We do lots of events, including the annual meeting, Sustainable Academy, and the email blast that Diane just mentioned. And of course, everyone can see our green bag lunch here, which is really taken off. And I find a lot of value in this digital landscape that has been created, because we're getting some great participation today. So I just wanted to invite anyone who's out there and it's not already a member to consider being one. You can go to our website at greeningusa.org. You can also find our links to Facebook page, other social media sites, as well as the email blast. So I hope everyone enjoys the topic today, and stay tuned for more fun topics to come. And we even invite you to suggest your own topics. We're always looking for new topics. Membership, as I just mentioned, ideas for green bag lunches, and some committees are starting to form within Greening USA too. So if you have interest beyond just membership, we'd like to hear from you. All right, enjoy, everyone.
And one thing that I neglected to mention was our upcoming events. April the 24th. This is quite a few years in a row now that we've worked with the Rosamond Gifford Zoo on Party for the Planet. And thank you, Greg Michael, for creating our Sustainability Academy, and we're still going. And Greg will be there with the Onondaga Earth Corps. But we have a nice number of people that will be exhibiting. There will also be virtual opportunities for people, and watch for that announcement to come out. as well as our May the 7th annual meeting, and that is in our newsletter. Everyone is invited to our annual meeting, and we call it the Big Tent, and we allow local organizations to talk a few moments about what it is that they are doing. Great work going on in Central New York. Always good to hear from them. One of my favorite comments is, I didn't know that somebody was working on that here. So a great opportunity to find out what's going on here and what are the different things that you can become involved with. Back to you, John.
All right. Thanks, Diane, very much. And I did see that that Mayor Walsh has joined us now, so I want to say thanks for being here with us today. We appreciate the support of Greening USA and this program by all the city staff that are joining us today. So thanks for being here to learn about this youth-led research project and the impacts of particulate matter in the I-81 area of the city. I'm not going to tell you too much more about what you're going to hear because our panelists will do that. And I'm going to just say a few things about Greg Michael, who contacted Greening USA and said, hey, we've got this project that we've been doing. We'd like to share it. And we said, great, because that's what green bag lunches were created for, to hear what people are doing in our community that are helping to create sustainability. Greg, I appreciate you being here. I just want to tell everyone a couple of things about Greg, although there aren't just a couple of things about Greg. But first, he was born in Boston. He attended college in Ohio in international studies, and then flew off to Tokyo for a degree in international and environmental education, and earned a master's degree in that program. He has worked for a program known as Eco Plus, connecting kids from around the world online with environmental adventures locally. And so Greg has been involved with bringing youth into the environmental movement ever since his college days, and probably before. Before becoming the director of the Onondaga Earth Corps, Greg was a natural resources youth educator for Cornell Cooperative Extension. And he also has his own consulting firm called which has worked for the City of Syracuse Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and also consulted for Jubilee Homes in the past on their urban farm project. Greg has served not only on the board of the Onondaga Earth Corps, but became its executive director in 2014. Since its inception in 2004, Onondaga Earth Corps has been empowering youth to be active participants in creating positive change for their communities and the environment. I just want to say that Greg has also had a longstanding relationship with Greening USA, having served on our board of directors and served as education committee chair, if I'm not mistaken, for about 5 years, was the creator of our Sustainability Academy. And also in the past, Greg has been recognized by Greening USA on, I think, at least 2 occasions with our Sustaining Our Community award. So Greg, we're really appreciative of the service you've given to Greening USA, but more importantly to our community. So I'm going to turn this over to you. Then you can introduce your panelists and control the presentation from this point forward.
Well, thank you very, very much, John. I wasn't expecting that. So folks, I've been introduced. My role today is really to kind of set the stage and have Terrance, who's one of our young adult participants, kind of tell his story, and we've got some great experts on board. So I wasn't expecting all of that, but I love working with young people. I love working with the environment. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Onondaga Earth Corps, we're a program that grew out of Southside neighborhood revitalization efforts in the early 2000s. Eli McDonald started our program. We draw on the roots of the South Side, and we also draw on the best practices of Civilian Conservation Corps history and Youth Conservation Corps programs that are across the country. We serve in the neighborhood of 40 to 60 youth and young adults between the ages of 15 and 25, and collaborate with everybody and anybody in the community that is excited about providing opportunity for young people to get civically engaged through the environment. So what we have laid out today is really a youth-centered look at air quality. Terrance is going to tell you about the research that he did, and then Terrance is going to lead some questions to our esteemed guests. I don't have as long profiles on each of our guests, but I hope that you can all see their names here, and you can look up all of the accolades. Starting with Terrance, he's been in our program for 3 years, started as a youth, advanced to our young adult programming, and is now serving as an Americorp intern. This project is part of his work. Amy Samuels is from Onondaga Environmental Institute. She is an amazing environmental educator in the community, grassroots educator. She's also serves on Onondaga Earth Corps' board of directors. Jaime Mirowsky is with SUNY ESF and is an air quality expert that's advised kind of the work as we've been doing it. Lanessa Chaplin is with NICLU. She's the assistant director for the Education Policy Center. And I've seen her in the community, boots on the ground, talking about the impacts, the environmental impacts of I-81, and just really been impressed with her work. And David Rufus is also with NICLU. He is the I-81 project coordinator, and we feel that the work of Earth Corps needs to be directly tied to grassroots community activities as well as to the science. So I'm going to stop there and pass things off to Terrance. Terrance, I'm going to share your slide deck. If Diane, you can allow me to share my screen.
Okay, I'm working on it. Okay, click the icon at the bottom that says screen.
Okay, first off, I would like to thank everyone speaking before me who led me up to where I am now. Thank you guys. So right now you see the title, OEC Air Quality. That title is simple, but I'll expand. Let's move on, Greg. Okay, so first off, to understand where we're going, we have to understand where we are. So to do that, we need to understand the scope of this project. As you can see, it says that EPA study showed poor air quality near heavily trafficked areas. So if the Environmental Protection Agency noticed certain trends, locally we feel the need to act and make sure that these trends hold true in our communities. So the Syracuse study was about testing the results of this EPA study and seeing if they held true locally in Syracuse. In order to do this, we had to come up with a hypothesis. And during that process, we predicted that pollution would decrease as distance from traffic areas increased. Let's move on. So you might find yourself asking, why is it important to monitor air quality? Well, it's because it's very integral to personal health. Well, I don't know all the health reasons. I do know two of the main reasons, is that it aggravates certain personal health issues like asthma, bronchitis, and other things that can affect your lungs. Another reason we need to monitor air quality is for the environment, for the health of the environment. The health of the environment and people's personal health is very much intertwined. And to make sure that these intertwined forces both stay positive, we need to help both of them grow. The last reason is to help gauge changes. Changes in our society affect air quality, which affects our personal health. Changes in society affect our personal health, which also affects our environmental health. Let's move on. So this slide right here is a slide that Amy Samuels gave to me from Jaime Mirowsky, and it's from their project, which I'm building on in my project. And this is just a picture of Syracuse and the I-81 concerns that we have. We can see all the things that we need to hear. Let's move on. Okay, there are different types of air quality threats. VOC and SVOC stand for volatile compounds and semi-volatile compounds. I have questions on those that I will later be asking Jaime Mirowsky. I hope she'll answer. There's also aerosol contents, which I also have questions on those. And the one I know most about, because I've done the most with it, is particulate matter. Particulate matter are small particles that are expelled through the air, and these are the types of things that get in your lungs and harm them. Let's move on. So right here we can see the north side sampling site. On there we can see the places where we sampled and how far we went. Next slide. Right here is our east side sampling site. Again, you can see where we were and where we went in order to measure the air quality. Let's move on. This is our south side sampling site. Again, you see where we were, where we went. Let's move on. Last but not least is our west side sampling site, and as you'll see later, this proved to be our most complicated sampling site. We found the most sporadic nature in the data. Let's move forward. All right, this is also a slide that I ripped from Jaime Mirowsky, and here you can see a crew of Onondaga Earth Corps youth, which just so happens to include me. And here you can see all of us using air quality sampling tools. That includes air quality monitor, rolling distance measure, and other qualitative and quantitative tools that we needed to collect data. Let's move on. Right here we can see one of our speakers, Amy Samuels, teaching another group how to monitor air quality. And right here we can see she's teaching one of the youths how to read the data and interpret it directly on the site where we're sampled. Let's move on. Right here we can see the smiles of some of our crew members. And right here, they're measuring the 100-foot intervals in which we needed to collect our data. But they had fun doing so. That's why you can see the smiles on their faces. Let's move on. Right here, this is also another crew that I just happened to be a part of, where we're using an anemometer and a thermometer to collect weather data that we need to interpret. Let's move on. So these are two graphs that honestly, I think that Amy knows more about than me, but this is just to kind of introduce you to how the data would look. So let's move on. Right here, here's another graph of how the data looks that I ripped from Jimmy Mirowsky's presentation. I would like Amy to further explain this, as it is not my area of expertise, but much more hers.
Okay, so let me talk you through what you're seeing here. On the x-axis, we have months. On the y-axis, we have the amount of particulate matter. And in this case, we're looking at small particulate matter, and those are things that are generally not visible with the naked eye. Often you need an electron microscope to see them. And each square represents one of the neighborhoods that we worked on, the south side, the east side, the west side, the north side. And a couple of things to note is that we did not see as, one more thing to explain. The different colors under each month actually represent the distances from the busy thoroughfare. So, for example, the orangey tone is the 0 point, and the purpley tone at the end of that could be anywhere from 700 to 900 feet from the trafficked area. And so if you see where the arrow just was, it actually seems to be saying that as we get away from the trafficked area, that particulate matter is increasing. And so that is not something we expected to see. We expected to see the exact opposite. And in most of the months that we sampled, the data was fairly similar no matter what site we were at. And if you notice where it says fair, poor, and very poor, fair corresponds to the black line, poor to the orange line, and very poor to the red line. And so most months, the data is fair or better. But then we have certain months where we see, or certain times when we sampled, that the air quality is poor or even very poor. And so although we didn't find a correlation between traffic and or the number of cars, the data was the same if we just looked at the number of cars versus particulate matter. We do see that there are instances in the city that air quality, particularly particulate matter, is of concern to particularly with people who have health issues or respiratory problems. And two of those really high points occur in February. And February is a time when sometimes we in the Northeast, when it's winter, we see these spikes due to wood burning for heating or coal burning. And so it would be interesting to find out exactly, how much coal burning is happening or wood burning is happening locally in the neighborhoods versus what could be coming in from further afield. Let's see. Then why don't we go to the next slide? And now this slide is looking at large particulate matter. And these are things that you can see with the naked eye. It could be something like dust. And if you notice the graph in the bottom right corner, we've got some pretty scary levels there on the west side of particulate matter. And one thing that we noticed when we were sampling is that there were a number of construction projects going on in the neighborhood, some of them very local, people just doing work on their homes. And so there were exposed piles of soil. And then there was also the construction happening at Fowler when they were redoing the football fields there. And so on windy days, and there was the one day where you see those really big spikes, we found that the wind it was one of those days where we're getting like mini tornadoes, like it would just kick up and it would go down, and then it would kick up and it would go down. And that's reflected in those high readings of particulate matter. And it just goes to show how, following best management practices, whether it's a small project or a large project, i.e. covering your dirt pile with a tarp when you're not on site, is something important to do. Next slide. Terrance, you want to take it from here?
Yes, thank you, Amy. So the results that we found from the project, one, we didn't see higher pollution as the distance increased or the number of cars increased. So right there, our expectations were subverted and our hypothesis was proven incorrect, at least for the moment. So from this, we can decide that maybe we need to do more extensive studies. Maybe we need to take more account for different things that we didn't take account for. Maybe we need better infrastructure. We need more resources allocated toward gathering data. We also need those resources to be put into figuring out which things have significant impacts on our readings. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, we got these ideas from the Environmental Protection Agency, and these ideas were sparked by them, so we have to understand where they came from too. And they're coming from was a standpoint of environmental justice. And the EPA defines that as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of national origin, regardless of income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Next slide, please. So, while we understand now the EPA's definition of environmental justice, we now need to understand what that means to me. Next slide. Here's what I wrote down of my interpretation of the EPA's definition of environmental justice. My definition states that we need to get more diversity in the voices involved with the decisions and implementation of those aforementioned decisions regarding the environment, because those decisions will inevitably affect the course of our planet's health. Next slide. So, with the data that we collected, we decided that one of the things we can do in order to combat these poor readings is to simply plant trees. And that's why you see tree planting right here. Right here, we see tree selection, and I would also offer Amy to give her insights on this after I do, because mine are very limited. So we use the iTree software to develop our scope to be more narrow in the trees that we could actually select. And the main prospects that I remember using were that the trees needed to be evergreen because they would block pollution year round. We needed to account for their height because sometimes there are electric wires and telephone poles and anything that might be above them that may block their height as they grow older. They also needed high tolerance to pollution and high tolerance to temperature. And as we know, Syracuse's temperature is often bipolar, so you need to make sure that these trees can withstand the high heat in the very low code. Amy, I would like you to present more of your insights on this.
Sure, thank you, Terrance. So iTree is a tool developed by the Forest Service that allows you to, one of the many things it allows you to do is put in certain kinds of environmental parameters or environmental factors that you'd like to see remediated by using trees. And so, for example, you can punch in, okay, information about stormwater and select what trees would be really good for reducing stormwater. We were concerned about particulate matter, and so we put that in. And then we also put in information that would select trees that are low allergenicity. So meaning that we didn't want to plant trees that have so much pollen floating in the winds that cause people allergies that it, would negate the health benefits of planting the tree to reduce particulate matter, but just add all this kind of pollen to the air. So based upon that, iTree generated a list of tree species that would work in our zone and would be evergreen. And these are species that many of you are probably familiar with, things like Norway spruce, white pine, red cedar, and blue spruce. And that's some of the trees that we used. And of course, some of the choices that we had were based upon what was available from local nurseries and what would work in the sites that we were planting in. Thanks, Terrance.
You're welcome, Amy. Also, thank you. So from choosing the trees, we then went to not only planting them, but getting our communities involved with planting them. Right here, you see that we planted at Springfield Gardens, Mountain View Park, Union, and DeMund Parks. And right here, we can also see a picture of a mother with her child smiling as they just finished planting their tree. Next slide, please. Right here, we can see the youth crew of Onondaga Earth Corps, another one which I just happened to be a part of, led by Quan Pedway, the former youth coordinator. And right here, we are doing something similar to what I'm doing right now, which is presenting directly to the community in their home, in their area, in their park. Next slide, please. So after we presented our ideas to the community, they decided to help us. After they decided to help us, they got involved with planting the tree. And right here, you can see there's a little bit going on to this tree. The trees are planted in a very thick burlap, and sometimes they have steel cages over them. So you can see everybody working together to free the tree from this burlap so it can be put into the earth. Next slide, please. Right here, we can see the tree actually being put into the ground, and it's settling in, and they're making sure that the root collar is exposed and that the tree stands up straight. Next slide, please. So after we're done planting trees, we like to take pictures. This is actually a picture that I'm pretty sure Amy took, where we have one of the coordinators of the Upward Bound project that Lemoyne College does, one of their youths, and also one of the coordinators from Onondaga Earth Corps. As I mentioned before, Quan Pedway. Standing next to her is me, Terrance Valdes, the youth from Onondaga Earth Corps. Next slide. Right here, we see, again, youths from Onondaga Earth Corps, but also youths from the Upward Bound project, and they are done planting their tree too. Next slide. So earlier, I mentioned my definition of environmental justice. And I would like to expand on that. Often, the solutions to the sorts of problem that our world faces require them to be world-altering. Sometimes these world-altering decisions are very black and white. What we need are solutions that take into account the ever-present and unavoidable naturally occurring gray areas in order to affect real, long-lasting, sustaining, positive change. So that concludes my presentation so far. Now I'll shut up and let the experts talk. But before I do that, I need to ask some questions. So first, I'll ask Jaime Mirowsky, because I know she's a professor at ESF and she's done a lot of work. And the first question I'd like to ask, as I mentioned before, is to kind of explain the intricacies of semi-volatile compounds and volatile compounds and aerosols for us.
Sure, thanks. So I don't do too much with the semi-volatiles, but in terms of the volatile compounds, you sample them very different. So these tend to be gases in the air compared to particles. We actually my lab did some work trying to measure volatile organic compounds near I-81. We used two different methods. One method was actually with the DEC, and we were able to look at certain compounds. When we tried to do it more in depth through an actual research study though, and I don't know if it was a difference based on labs, we weren't able to quantify things. So from a health perspective, that's great. That means that the concentrations were so low, and they are kind of toxic, so you don't want to breathe them in. But yeah, when you're talking about the volatile organic compounds compared to the particles, which are your solids, your volatiles are going to be your gases in the air, so you will not be able to see them at all. Did I answer your question?
Yes, partially, thank you. Did you mind speaking on aerosols?
Sure, so aerosols are just a general word for solids and liquids in the air. So we kind of, just based on their properties, we sample for them almost simultaneously. So yeah, that's pretty much just the definition of an aerosol, is a solid or liquid suspended in air. And then we separate that from gases, which are gases. So it's just the different states of matter.
Okay, thank you for that answer. It's much appreciated. Next question I would like to ask is, what is the necessity to include data when we present our ideas?
The necessity to include data, I mean, I guess it's who you're presenting to. Can you be a little more specific with your question?
Well, I didn't have any specific thoughts prepared, but I guess I'll try to form some off the cuff. But yeah, when we talk about the necessity to include data, we usually like to either make things very specific or very broad, and sometimes both of these interpretations and implementations of these ideas don't work. So I'm wondering if there's a middle ground that we can reach.
I think that it probably just all goes back to the purpose and the objective of what you're trying to study. So sometimes you might want to be very specific. So in what you had just presented, you were really focusing on the small particles versus the large particles. So in that instance, it would be very specific. So you would want to include more specific information. If you wanted to just talk about air quality in general, then you probably could be a little bit more broad. But when we do studies like this, we really want to make sure that they're very objective based and very hypothesis based, and that kind of sets you up in terms of what data you want to collect and how you would want to present it.
Okay, thank you. One, I won't say last question that I have for you, but how does the subversions of our expectations, how should that cause us to act?
I mean, I tried to go into studies. You generally have a hypothesis when you're going in, but you want to make sure that sometimes the more interesting things are the things that you're not actually expecting to find. So in that sense, when you're designing projects and then when you're carrying them out, while I always have a hypothesis in mind, I do want to make sure I'm being I'm not trying to look at the data to make sure that I'm proving that hypothesis. I want to make sure that I'm looking at everything collectively. And you presented some slides where you saw things that you were not expecting, and then that leads you to go down other routes and design other studies and try to figure out what has happened. So yeah, just make sure when you're looking at your data, you have a hypothesis, you're doing it for a reason, but when your hypothesis doesn't look like it's panning out, that's sometimes where a really interesting story you might find.
Thank you very much, Jaime.
You're welcome.
Terrance, this
Yes.
is Greg. Do you mind if I have one follow-up for Jaime on that?
No, I don't. Please continue.
Thank you. So our study looks, very short term. And I know that you are privy to air quality data kind of on a larger scale. That Terrance is talking about specificity. We looked very narrowly at a short period of time. But I'm curious what, as an environmental scientist looking at this issue, what some of your biggest concerns are around air quality trends and as relates to both the traffic, but also the future construction that people are starting to look at for I-81 and other highway projects.
Yeah, so I think that looking long term is probably my biggest concern right now. If this construction, it looks like it's supposed to start in 2022 from everything I've read. And actually, yeah, that's kind of my biggest concern, is that we're not going to have a lot of data right now, and we don't have a lot of data for the past few years. So it is going to be very difficult to see if a change is occurring if you don't have any baseline values. So I'm really happy that you guys have been able to go out and actually collect some baseline values. My lab has also gone out to do some baseline data as well. But even looking long term and through the construction phase, and then beyond that, there are so many intricacies that are going to make it very complicated, because air quality changes year to year, it changes season to season. Me and my grad students have done some work on the Syracuse Center of Excellence, and we found that even day to day, we could pick out certain days and certain events. So when we were doing some sampling back in August 2 years ago, we could actually see the air quality get worse during SU Move-In Day. So there are just so many things that, short term to keep into account and just note all of those different things. But so yeah, while specific data is good, getting it long term is better, because then you can average things out. So we can kind of average out SU Move-In Day with the rest of August or with the rest of that week. But yeah, things get a little bit complicated if you're doing a before, during, and after, if you don't have a lot of before data and a lot of after data. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Back to you, Terrance.
Thank you for asking those questions. They provide a lot of insight. So moving on, I also have questions for people of the New York Civil Liberties Union. I know that Vanessa Chaplin and David Rufus are here. First question I would ask to either of them is, how do we protect the local residents in our areas?
I'll take this one, David, if you don't mind. Okay. First, I want to commend all of the work that the students have done. I just think it's incredible that you guys are, on the ground doing the work and planting the trees, which I always, think is a great thing, and it's a great initiative to continue. I just want to dial it back just a little bit to kind of make some really, concrete points here about air pollution next to heavily trafficked roads and what the EPA defines as a major roadway. And so this kind of research about the impacts on communities who live next to major roadways goes back as far as the building of highways. And so we can go back to the 1970s, where the Environmental Protection Agency was formed and started really looking at, well, not formed, but some of their air protection quality, the Clean Air Act, et cetera. And they started looking at how, air pollution impacts communities who live close to viaducts. And so I do a lot of work around air pollution. I do a lot of challenging to EPA findings. It's part of my statewide initiative, not so much here because we haven't gotten there yet in this project. But what I do know is that there are what they call gold standard testing, and they only will accept or look at certain air quality tests from certain equipment. And it's typically the more expensive equipment that, you or I couldn't afford. And so I just want to kind of put it in context that, the air quality there, has been studied, and it has been studied for a very long time by several different organizations who have come to conclusions that the impact on air quality in communities close to viaducts, such as I-81, is detrimental to their health for many, many reasons. And so we see a lot of those impacts in that community, as it has a raised and elevated level of asthma, higher than Syracuse's average and also higher than the county's average. We also see that in the impact on the school and all the correlations and connections between their not only physical health, but also their cognitive and mental health. And so I just want to kind of put that out there, that there are, and many folks here on this call know there are testing standards and tons of research from many, many states, including New York, that indicate and are conclusive that air pollution near major roadways is a significant problem in the community. So I think going back to your question, which I think is a great one, is just, first understanding what the community needs. And so I think as an advocate, as an attorney, you tend to want to go into communities and solve their problems, right? And that leaves a lot of assumption, maybe arrogance sometimes, that you understand what their problems are, right? Because you've read a book or you've researched and you're knowledgeable about the information, but that's not the case, right? So I think to answer your question, how you help the community is first, and David can speak to this more about, first gaining trust in that community and listening to what they want and listening to what they need and trying to help them initiate whatever they need and whatever they want. I mean, if we want to go into a community and talk about the I-81 viaduct and how it's best for their physical, psychological, and emotional health for it to be removed, but if they want to talk about, this pothole that's been in front of their house for 2 weeks, we need to first talk about their immediate needs and immediate issues before we can get to the big picture things. And so I think one of the things that I try to do in like my lawyering is really what we call like movement lawyering, means go into the community and figure out what they need and what they want. And most of you here, we've presented in front of around the I-81 report, but all of those recommendations have come out of the community, and we just kind of use like our legal brains and our advocacy brains to kind of put it in a way that makes it more forceful, but really elevating and uplifting their voice and doing things like what you're doing here right now, Terrance, by letting you lead the way. Like this is your meeting and you're hosting this, and kind of making sure that we're highlighting you and your work, and not highlighting us in our work, because our work is mundane and it usually happens behind a desk.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Moving on, I would also like to ask, I would first like to state that we have to figure out a way to impart environmental justice while taking real and authentic account for people in the community. And you've obviously just touched on this, but I'd like more insight onto what the risks are in taking action in the community.
I'll say it, Vanessa. Just thanks, Terrance. It's absolutely a pleasure to sit in front of the screen and see you do what you do best in terms of in integrating and working real hard in this community to bring things forward for folks. I think one thing that when we talk about just looking at environmental justice for people is making sure that people have the right information. There's so many things happening, so many things going on, so many different filters and so many different streams of informations and thoughts and cares and what's happening in the neighborhood. And I think that one thing that's critical is that we sort through the fluff, get through the truth, and shrink it down so that people can have it, understand it, and be able to use it. And I think right now, while people are under such strain of not just pollutions, but information, there's an information pollution going on right now. There's just so much of it that it's very difficult for folks to manage it and get through it. So I think that when you're doing the things that you do and you find that there's these little instruments that can be individualized and personalized so that you can check those things that are happening. We need to treat information in the same way. We need to find these instruments, these tools that we can shrink this information, put it into this platform and give it to the folks so they can turn it on and use it when they need to. So I think that when you talk about environmental justice for folks, it's just making sure that they're given the right information and it's managed properly, especially in this particular community up and down the corridor. Oh, that's for me.
Thank you. Well, in order to understand what I'm doing, I would like to understand what New York Civil Liberty Union is doing. So what are you guys doing specifically?
Well, I think we're a multi-issue organization. And so we have a lot of issues. And David can talk a lot about some very specific issues around the Central New York office. What I do is I do the statewide environmental justice work. And so I kind of cover the state, but for most of you, for the first 2 years that I was here, I did just specifically I-81. And so I can describe what that work looks like. Well, one, we try to understand the subject area, so we do our own independent research, a lot like what you did. What's the issue? How can we figure this out? Hiring environmental justice expert who already knows this issue to help us along the way and figure out our place in this work. And I think much like what you're pointing out is what we quickly realized was there's an intersection where environmental justice and civil rights meets, right? So when you talk about equal protection for all, that's right out of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? And so we are a law firm that works around civil rights and civil liberties. And so where does environmental justice and civil rights meet? And so when we figured out where that meeting place was, okay, what can we do to make sure, as the definition describes, there's equal access and opportunity to all, right? And we like to use the term equity because it's more about equity versus equal. And so for the first step we took was, well, what does the community think about this? Before we even think about any advocacy strategies or any other strategies, what does the community think about this? And so one of the first orders of business was to start having these public forums, right, in the community and say, hey, we're here just to listen because we have no idea how you guys feel about this I-81 viaduct. It would be great for our work for us to know so we can really start advocating for what you want. And so we quickly learned that most people in that community do not want the viaduct, right? They didn't want it in their backyard. They didn't want it to begin with. And it really was a psychological barrier that made them feel boxed in a segregated neighborhood. And so we learned that very quickly through our work. And so the next step was like, okay, well, we all agree the viaduct must come down, but so how would that impact your lives? And so we were having community meetings asking those very specific questions. And when we weren't seeing the results that we wanted, because much like other organizations on here, we're not getting a lot of participation from community meetings, we started canvassing. So we would every Tuesday and Saturday, with many folks on this call, I'm not going to call anyone out, but I see Barry Gordon on the call. He was one of my many, and Peter, I see Peter on the call, one of my many, every Saturday canvassers, and we would knock on doors and ask questions. We'd knock on doors and we'd have notebooks and pens and paper and try to figure out, okay, what do you want? Let's document this. Let's figure this out. And also advertise our community meetings. So we did that literally for the first 18 months of the project. And so we were really like a grassroots organizing effort, and less of an advocacy group, because we were trying to figure out what they wanted. And I think the last remaining 6 months, we got hit with COVID, all that stopped, right? And so then we decided, okay, well, let's really focus on the report, because now we kind of have a good grasp of what folks want. So that's kind of the public facing work. But behind the scenes, we're like meeting with city legislators, meeting with the administration, meeting with Ben Walsh. He was having his own I-81 cooperative meetings every third Thursday of the month that we were attending and being very active in those conversations. Meeting with state legislators, federal legislators, meeting with the EPA, meeting with the Federal Highway Administration, and so meeting with the New York State Department of Transportation, obviously. So lots of meetings, lots of conversations, lots of reading, lots of writing. That's what we've been doing around this project. And since we went virtual, David has really led the way on doing our virtual Tuesday talks that we host every Tuesday. And if you're interested in attending those, please reach out to David Rufus and he'll give you that information. And anything I left off, just jump right in, David.
Just oh, here I'm in now. Sorry about that. Just quickly, I think that Lanessa's A to Z process and how we were dealing with folks in this community and working with them. I think once we've gone through the alphabets of care for folks, we began to look at a way to take their information that we put into the proposal, the report, but more importantly, a way to share the information with them. You know, taking their information, what they believe in, what they question, what they've been concerned about, what they challenge, and then trying to take that information and pull it together so that they have a way to present it. You know, what's very difficult for people to do is that when they're under stress, when they're struggling, when they're hungry, when they're homeless, and when they're experiencing a lot of difficulties, it's very difficult for them to stand up and represent themselves, to stand on their own 2 feet, to manage what's going on with them. So we look at what we're doing as being the crutch to help the people stand. So we're going to be there. We're going to be the shoulder that they can lean on. We're going to be the hands that they can hold. We're going to be the tears that help them cry. We're going to be the people that will present the issues that they have with them, not for them, but with them through this process. So I think that as we work through this process, we're just making sure that what they have in their minds and on their hearts is being presented in a proper way that people get a chance to actually have some say in what's going on with them. If that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. Thank you guys for doing this. One last point, with the emphasis on community involvement, how do we best utilize the people who these changes will affect the most?
Quickly, just from my perspective, I think that when you look at the people that are in the impact zone, and we're talking about from, you know, you can go from Ballantyne all the way down to Erie Boulevard on this whole process. If in fact we take a care for the people's lens, if we look at this thing from a caring perspective, making sure that we're very intimate and personal about taking care of every individual need that people represent along this corridor. We can't leave any stones unturned. We can't act as if one level is more important than the other level. We have to make sure that everything that the people have represented in this report gets attention paid to it. And then we have to make sure that there is a plan for every individual going through this process. We can't ultimately decide that we're just going to disrupt and destroy without taking their care and their concern into this process. So the best way to utilize the folks is make sure that you represent their concerns and you share it with them and you share that their concerns and you agree and believe in their concerns. I think that's most important. If we don't take care of the people that we are serving or interacting with, then it tends to fall apart for folks. So I think that most importantly, like you plant those trees and you water them, people need the same kind of love and care as we go through this process. We just can't ultimately come in and make decisions without giving some type of water, some type of fertilizer, some type of food to help these folks, to help our folks flourish and grow in these communities.
Well said, everybody. I guess my closing thoughts are, I thank everybody else for being here. I wouldn't be where I am without everyone else, so thank you first and foremost. Yeah, I think that we need to affect real positive change, and we all have to figure out personally our best ways to do so. One of the standing pieces of advice that I hold is think globally, act locally. So that's what I try to do, and that's what I'll continue to try to do. Peace.
Thank you, Terrance. So we do have some time to take some questions. I wanted to jump back to kind of the air quality and environmental side of things. I know that the current recommendation is to go with a boulevard approach. And I'm curious both from Jaime and from NICLU's perspective about, you know, what are the environmental concerns related to a boulevard option? Are there design options that we need to make sure are part of the plan? And from the community side too, what are people's concerns about the boulevard? So maybe we could start with Jaime, and then Jaime, if you want to pass it back to either David or Lanessa, that would be great.
Sure, and actually that's a really interesting concept because from my perspective, and a lot of the studies that Amy and Terrance were talking about in terms of looking at distance away from a road, where you're closest to the source, so in this case where you're closest to the cars and trucks, that's where you would expect the higher concentrations to be. In doing a pretty in-depth literature search, there's not too much air quality research next to viaducts, which are interesting because they're elevated. So now you have the concept of wind speed, wind direction. Essentially, is the viaduct, by being elevated, kind of making the air particles kind of go over these neighborhoods and settle farther down, and maybe that's why you're seeing higher concentrations farther away. And that's not really ever been studied as far as I know. So me and my grad student are trying to do some of that work. Of course, Syracuse is a difficult place to do it because we have buildings. But we've done some preliminary studies where we've put monitors on the rooftop of a building and the ground level of a building right by I-81. And we did find higher levels of particles at the rooftop than directly under it, suggesting that the viaduct might actually be somewhat protective depending on the wind speed and direction. So we're continuing some work with that, and we're continuing some chemical analysis with that as well. But it is really interesting thought that just so few work has been done near viaducts that you can't take the regular literature, which is looking at ground level highways and then extrapolating it to this really unique environment. So right now there just really isn't too much there, but I kind of have the hypothesis right now that the viaducts might actually be somewhat protective in terms of air pollution, and that if the viaduct is actually lower to the ground level, that the air quality could actually be worse next to these different neighborhoods. And it's just something that's never been tested, so I can't really comment too much more on that. But it is something that should be thought about, because that literature is very extensive, saying right next to a roadway, air pollution levels are higher, noise levels are also high, which also has a lot of really bad health effects associated with them. So that's kind of my take, which is it's a really interesting scenario, and I don't know until we actually do really well-designed research studies if we'll be able to answer those questions right now.
So yeah, thanks, Jaime. And I actually found some research around viaducts, so I'd be happy to share that with you. I think the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, how are we defining major roadway? And so right now the definition of major roadway is 30,000 cars or more. And so what we know with the community grade option is it's going to reroute traffic, specifically major trucks, who are the biggest offenders of emitting particulate matter specifically. But so first we need to ask the question, and this question is not directed to this group, but this question is directed to the Department of Transportation. How much rerouting of traffic is going to happen during this new plan, right? And so right now that viaduct sees about 90,000 cars a day, well over the 30,000 mark. But what we don't know is when this traffic is rerouted, will that go under 30,000? So will that kind of remove this community from being near a major roadway as defined by the Environmental Protection Agency, right? That's the first question we have to figure out. The second question is, what kind of mitigating efforts are they going to do if, in fact, it doesn't meet the 30,000 marker? There are several ways to mitigate air pollution from major roadways that are outlined on the Environmental Protection Agency website. And you can also look at NRDC, Earth Justice, several of very big environmental law firms, advocacy groups have lots of detailed information about how to mitigate air pollution if you are within that 500 feet of 30,000 cars or more. And so I think the first question is, under the current preferred option, we know that's going to reroute traffic. So is that going to get them under the marker of 30,000? If it's not going to reroute traffic, the second question is, are they prepared to do mitigation to ensure that the noise and air pollution that is in that community is absorbed? And that's by exactly what you guys are doing, Terrance, planting trees and vegetation and creating these buffers. We do know they are looking at noise walls and other ways to abate the noise pollution that will happen in that community that's already happening. I mean, we've been knocking on doors there for quite some time, and we've been in people's living rooms, and where we literally can't hear them talking from across the living room because they're so close to the viaduct, all you hear are trucks buzzing by. And so the noise pollution is there. It's actually in violation of the federal regulations. But at the time when the viaduct was built, those regulations didn't exist. So the noise pollution is going to have to be addressed no matter what. But I do think there is some good information out there about viaducts near roadways that I'd be happy to share with anyone who is looking for that information. And I do think that figuring out how many cars are going to be going down that viaduct before we can even have this conversation, we need to know, is it still going to be a major roadway? And I think that's one of the questions that we don't know and we need to look into, and specifically have the DOT do their own analysis, because they do have scientists and engineers that study these things. And so that's something that we actually put in our report as a recommendation for the DOT to complete before they start the project.
Thank you, Lanessa and Jaime. I'd like to, I know some of you folks in this room may have some questions as well. And I know some of you have been looking at this, very closely. And I know both with Greening USA and the Urban Jobs Task Force, there's been a lot of research into the environmental impact statement. I don't know if there's anyone who feels comfortable sharing what the status of that is and what people can do to learn more.
Also, yeah, I mean, I don't want to take up too much space here, but so where they're at now in the process, and I think Barry Lynch, anyone on this call can really answer this question, but where they're at now is they're reviewing the edits and recommendations that the Federal Highway Administration has made to their report, and so they're still in the reviewing process. There isn't a draft environmental impact statement available to the public yet. We're hoping that it becomes available within the next couple months, and we anticipate it will be available at least by the summer. But you know, the project has been happening for a decade now, so we say by the summer, but it could be next summer. We really don't know. But how people can get involved. So NYCLU has a landing page, NYCLU/I-81, so you can get some information on there. And then also DOT's website, they have it's I-81/opportunities, and you can get all your information from there. And what I would say is, you know, if you're interested in getting involved, you know, email them. They are very responsive, and they are taking comments. So you don't have to wait for the public comment period to submit a comment. You can submit a comment anytime. They actually prefer earlier than later. So submit comments through their website portal. And if you want to get involved in more of our work, I'm happy to invite you all to our Tuesday community talks that we do every Tuesday at 2 o'clock.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions if folks want to raise their hand or just turn on their mics? And any questions to any of the panelists? I see Bob Haley.
Yeah, that's good. And I'll also add, if you want to use your chat to either put the word question or write your question, go ahead and do that. But I heard that Bob was called on.
Well, thank you. First of all, I do want to thank you for this presentation, Terrance and your team, and it's good to see you, Greg and Amy, again, and all the work you've been doing for all these years. One of the things that Vanessa just mentioned is very important. We still need some basic answers from the DOT on how many cars are going to be handled, the street level option, which is the community grid. And the second part of that is that we're going to be seeing maybe in early summers, the thought is the actual design details. It's the details at this point of the community grid that will really make it successful. And the details include simple things like how big is the highway? How big is the community grid on the ground? How wide, how large, and how big the vehicles can be on the community grid option as the DOT is proposing it. What size trucks, how many trucks, how frequently trucks, since they are the primary offenders of particulates. And I think, so I think the details that might be helpful is simply the design, how big it is, how many vehicles, how fast, and wider roads encourage faster driving. So that's all part of the formula. But to make the complicated simple in what we're going to see from the DOT next is just how big is the road and what's it encouraging? Is it encouraging speed? Is it encouraging size, volume? So that's the way I would try and simplify the complexity of this down to something we can get our hands around. And certainly, it's interesting to me to hear your analysis of the particulates, Terrance, that you did. And I know Peter King is, and so many people are experts on the history of data for particulates. I mean, we've had measurements for years, but we don't see that in the DOT decision-making criteria. So again, I thank you for your efforts to bring that to the forefront and encourage everyone to try and make the complicated simple. What does it mean to us living in this space? Thanks.
I wanted to ask Vanessa, you said that there's an opportunity for people to get involved on your Tuesday meetings. How do we find out about those? How does Greening USA help you promote those meetings? Where do we?
So I'll put the email address of both David Rufus and Kevin Atwater in the chat box. And so typically you would just email Kevin and let him know that you want to get the Zoom link, and then we'll send the Zoom link out. We do try to be mindful that this is a community meeting, so like we don't want, I'll leave it as that. So I'll send you, we try to make sure that community members are at the meeting, like actually folks who live in the Central New York region. Sometimes we get other people for other initiatives, like people running for positions and blah, blah, blah. So we just really try to keep it focused on community members. And so I'll send you both their emails, and just feel free to email them and they'll put you on the list.
I understand. Thank you.
So if I can just quickly add one thing. I did read the environmental draft report. It was a while ago. I was trying to parse through some of it. And one thing that was noted in there, and I don't know how they determined this, was that they don't think that diesel vehicles will go around the city, that they'll still continue to go through the city, even if it's the community grid. And that's probably the biggest concern, is those are the vehicles that you really want to go not directly through the city. I mean, speed limit, yes, all of that's really important, but it's really the diesel vehicles and their exhaust and their noise that are going to be most toxic and hazardous to the community compared to the gasoline vehicles. Again, I don't know how they determined that, but that was actually in one of their draft reports.
Yeah, that's true. And I think really specifically, the diesel trucks, they were, I think, outlining diesel trucks that need to make deliveries to the Syracuse area, not diesel trucks that are moving through the city to get to another location. So in the report, they do see a significant drop in the amount of diesel trucks, but they do have, I think, in the design plan, at least one exit that would be designated for deliveries of folks how to get to Syracuse. And I think it'd be interesting to hear folks' ideas and opinions, and especially comments to the DOT if you have additional thoughts on how, you know, diesel trucks that need to actually deliver goods and services to the actual Syracuse region, how they would get here without exiting at least one access ramp to get to the city. But I don't have the numbers because this happened. I read the report 2 years ago at this point. But there was a significant drop in, Barry and Bob helped me out. There was a significant drop in the amount of diesel trucks, but I think there was room for delivery trucks to still come through.
Barry, did you want to comment?
And what Vanessa said is correct. I mean, the reference to diesel trucks would just be about trucks that are making local deliveries. How access to local deliveries would be managed is, you know, something we're going to have to get more details on when we get the actual DEIS, because as people have frequently noted, you know, there's a lot of questions still remaining that we're not going to really be able to tell what's going on until we see the real DEIS and start responding to that.
Does anyone here know whether it's currently illegal for the large semis to be going through downtown? Because I thought it was. Does anybody know? I drove yesterday and a couple got on and just kept going. So they were going right through the city and they were huge.
I know that there's some local municipal ordinances that ban that. I don't know if Syracuse has that ordinance. So I'm not sure if it's a violation of that ordinance or not, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know absolutely either. However, the DOT is using qualified highway, which is a term, as part of their design. So we need to look for that term. And secondly, that term then allows the largest 53-foot vehicles to go on that roadway. Presently, I can't tell you, because I don't know, if the 53-foot vehicles are not supposed to be on our city streets, because they are. They do deliveries, they do moving, big shows come into town, whatever it is. And the stores all the way through our entire city have some deliveries from the 53-foot trucks. The trucking industry has gone to larger trucks for the sake of their economies. So it's been a battle forever. As far as, are they not supposed to be on our city streets, Diane? I can't answer that exactly by law.
So I'm not talking about on our city streets. We were passing through Syracuse yesterday and a huge semi came off of 690, got onto 81 South and kept going. And I didn't think that was legal for them to use 81 to pass through the center of the city. I thought they were required to go around. I'm not talking local deliveries. You can't do anything.
Yeah, I understand your question. No, they are absolutely allowed to use the highway. I mean, and that's what they have been using ever since it was built for that purpose. So they absolutely 690, 81. With this new community grid alternative, though, that will be a different story. And so they will be rerouting and requiring trucks not to get on the portions of I-81 and the business loop. I mean, we got to really kind of hone this down to we're talking about 1.4 miles of I-81. We're not talking about the entire I-81, right? I-81 will always be here. We're talking about the raised viaduct. And so under the new plan, they will be required to go around and use 481. That will be outfitted to now fit the new traffic. But under the current situation, no, we have that happening quite frequently.
Great. Look, thank you. It looks like we've got a few questions for you, Jaime. One from David Mankiewicz. Could you speak to the difficulty of separating the impact of the highway from other nearby uses? There's an adjacent railroad line and power plants. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. There are ways to do it. With more complicated analysis, it usually involves more complicated work and a lot more money. But there are actually specific markers for, say, if you're, so we tend to collect a lot of particles. You can do, it's called a metal analysis. So you look at all the different metals that are present in the particles. So rather than use the monitors that Amy was using and that Terrance were using, you actually have to go and set up samplers to collect things on filters, and then you have to extract things off the filters and do a chemical analysis. So it is a bit more work, but you can separate out tire tread with and brake wear. So if you see higher concentrations of, I believe it's barium and antimony, then you know that it's from truck traffic versus you shouldn't see those if it's power plants. So there are ways to do it, but that involves a lot of labor and a lot of really expensive equipment to be able to do it. So that's pretty much my answer to David. And I see there's another one from Amy, which is a little bit about lead and asbestos. So I have some colleagues at Upstate who several years ago did a small study on workers that were taking down some lead paint on I-81. And when you're dealing with lead paint, generally you always test the workers' blood for lead during the process. So before, during, and after, to make sure that they're not exposed to elevated levels of lead. And they did find the levels went up slightly. So that kind of suggests that there is lead in the paint on the bridge. So that's a big concern in terms of the construction that's going to happen. And there are some remediation methods, but nothing's ever going to be 100% perfect. So that is a bit of concern in terms of specific metals, because lead is really, really toxic, especially for children. And I believe there's also been some potential concerns about asbestos being in the bridge as well. So big concerns about the construction process that we haven't really talked about right now. And that would be the lead and asbestos. And then, that can also get into the soil, and that can linger in the soil for a while too. So it's not just an air quality issue. Now it's a, big environmental issue surrounding the whole entire area, just as a result of the construction, regardless of whether the viaduct stays or the community grid is what happens. The construction is another huge, huge component to this that deserves a lot of attention.
Thank you, Jaime. I see, Barry, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I do. I think that we must keep in mind that fundamentally this is an issue of justice, and that those who contribute the most to pollution through traffic suffer the least, and those who contribute the least, the residents, suffer the most. And we have to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Gordon. John?
Yeah, Greg, thanks for all you've done here. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I was thinking something Amy said when she was explaining some of the charts and graphs the hypotheses that she offered that there may be still some burning of coal or still some wood burning going on in neighborhoods. And I suspect that that can have an impact on health in the neighborhoods. And I'm wondering if anyone, and maybe it's Amy or anyone, has any ideas of following up on this this potential. And it would seem that would be time to try to eliminate those sources for the people in those neighborhoods, if that is a significant source of air pollution in those local areas.
So we haven't discussed following up or how that might proceed, but I'd actually be interested in hearing a bit more from Jaime about, you know, the concerns of winter fuel and home heating in general, and what she knows about that.
Sure. I don't do too much with wood burning. There's actually somebody at Cornell who's been studying this quite frequently. Apparently Cornell has really, or Ithaca has really high levels of wood smoke in the winter. They were pretty much the one who told me that if you see high levels in January and February, it's probably because of people burning wood inside. I mean, just anytime you're burning things, you're releasing toxicants into the air. Whether it's in the form of the particles that you can see or the different gases that are being released. I can't imagine that you would be able to go into people's homes and tell them that they're not allowed to have their fireplace on in the winter. But it is a concern. And I think the other thing that we should probably note too is that we're talking a lot about air quality, but Syracuse is actually a pretty clean city. So even if you see higher levels in January and February, compared to, you know, Manhattan, and, you know, we can go big and compare it to China or India, our levels are really, really, really low, just generally across the city. So when you're seeing these these peaks because of potential wood smoke, it's probably still well below the EPA air quality standard.
The only thing I would like to add for a moment before we close out is I think I want to reflect on David's comment in the chat, and I think what it highlights is that there are communities, and I think Barry Gordon got to this a little bit, specifically Black and Brown communities, and it's not unique to Syracuse. So I don't want to seem like this is a Syracuse problem. This is a national problem, where Black and Brown communities are inundated and overpolluted with several different pollutants in their community. And this community here has not only the viaduct, but they have the steam plant and the railroads, and it's a food desert, and has higher levels of lead. It's a lead hot spot. There's just so many burdens in this community that's already existing. And so I really want to kind of take the framework away from this is an individual person's problem. This is an individualistic problem of people burning too much wood, or people behaving badly, or people not being conscious of their carbon footprint, and really kind of put this in the lens of this is a structural, systematic issue, right? So this is the intentional placement of toxins in Black and Brown communities that come from and stem from our housing practices that go all the way back to when segregation was legal and to how redlining occurred. And so really thinking about how we got here, I think, is an important piece of how we can dig ourselves out. And so like that's why our work doesn't focus on people's individual patterns, right? It focuses on what systems and structures can we change to ensure that the damage from the past is now being addressed. And we know the damage from the past is the intentional placement of toxins in Black and Brown communities in Syracuse and other states and countries, I mean, other places across the country. And so how can we start removing some of those toxins? And so in our report, you'll see that we're asking them to remediate the soil. We're asking them to do a lead analysis. We're asking them to do a community health analysis. We're asking them to do another air quality analysis. So by any means, I don't want to give the impression that the I-81 community, the community grid is going to come and do anything miraculously. That's not going to happen. First step is let's remove the viaduct. Second step is let's clean the health of this community up. And we're saying one thing cannot happen with the other. And so we've been very, very, I think, aggressive with this point of we need to have transformation with equity. And I think, and we're going to continue to push that narrative until we can move the needle a little bit in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Lanessa. So John, I'm going to pass it to you to close out, but I want a special shout out and thanks to Terrance. Amy at OEI worked really closely with us on the research. And David, Lanessa, and Jaime, just a thanks from OEC. And if you all see opportunities for Earth Corps to be involved, boots on the ground with young people that live and are working in the community with Earth Corps, please keep us in mind.
Great. And yeah, Greg, I couldn't say it any better. I appreciate all the work and effort that all of our panelists and you have done for today's presentation. I think it was a good discussion, a lot more to be done, and I'm looking forward to being able to work with all of you going forward in the future. So we'll make a date in the future again to do it again and hearing from you. So thank you all very much, and I think we'll end the meeting here. Diane,
Well,
anything else?
Can I just ask Terrance if you've got a last shout out?